The rich humiliated her and kicked her out of the party, without knowing she was the owner of the place. Don't forget to comment what country you're watching us from. It all began on a rainy night when a woman in a white dress, completely soaked, entered the mansion's grand hall, trembling. The guests, dressed in formal attire with wine glasses in hand, turned with disdain. Some laughed, others frowned. "And who invited her? She looks like a lost maid," murmured a woman in an emerald green dress as she squeezed her husband's arm. The drenched woman said nothing. She just observed the place as if it belonged to her and began to walk slowly toward the center of the hall. That's when Claudia, an event planner, approached her with a haughty tone. "Miss, this is a private party. The kitchen is that way if you're here to work." But she didn't answer. She just looked at her with a mix of pain and determination. The guards arrived just seconds later, alerted by a couple of guests who pretended to feel threatened. "Ma'am, come with us. You're interrupting a high society celebration," said one of the burly men, grabbing her by the arm. "Let go of me," she demanded firmly. Her voice was strong, but somewhat broken by the humiliation. Claudia turned to the guests with a mocking smile. "This is what happens when you don't watch the entrances. Even the maids want to play queen." Some applauded as if it were just another part of the night's entertainment. No one seemed to recognize her. No one seemed to notice the most important detail. The woman wasn't lost, much less out of place, as the guards dragged her out into the rain, her clothes clinging to her skin and her eyes full of rage. One of the guests took out his phone to record. "This is going to go viral. Look at her dramatic face," exclaimed a blonde girl in a pink dress, laughing. The woman resisted, but not physically, only with her gaze. A gaze that hid more than anyone could imagine. "She doesn't have a shred of dignity," she managed to say before being pushed toward the entrance. The pain wasn't just in her knees, bruised by the marble, but in the silent betrayal of all those who knew her and pretended not to see her. Minutes before all this happened, that woman, Andrea, had arrived without a chauffeur, without makeup, without jewelry, not out of carelessness, but for a very clear reason. She wanted to see with her own eyes how those who claimed to admire her would behave when they didn't recognize her. She was the owner of that property, inherited after decades of sacrifice from her mother, a woman who was raised by a wealthy family and managed to build a real estate empire. Andrea had decided that day to test her staff, her partners, and even her supposed friends, but no one passed the test. They all judged her by her appearance, for not wearing an expensive label. At the door, soaked and humiliated, she looked up at the group, laughing from inside. "Do you realize how low you've stooped?" Claudia yelled at her from the entrance, not knowing she was mocking the person who had been paying her salary for the last 4 years. The guards only let her go when they were sure she was off the threshold. And as the rain continued to fall on her, the silence inside was broken by a loud slam of the door. Someone from the second floor was watching everything on a security camera. Andrea's trusted assistant, who had clear instructions to record every second. In the kitchen, as the scandal outside grew, one of the cooks whispered to another, "I think that was Mrs. Andrea, but I'm not sure. She looks so different." "It was her," the other replied, worried. "Then everyone out there is going to regret this." But it was too late. Outside, no one had had the courage to stop the humiliation. Everyone, including some close employees, chose to stay on the sidelines. The silence of those who knew the truth became complicity. Andrea knew it, which is why she didn't scream or ask for help. She just endured it with rage and a very clear idea of what she would do next. Some guests began to comment among themselves, "Doesn't she look familiar to you?" "Yeah, but she was probably just some crazy person or something." No one important would come to a formal party dressed like that. The laughter continued, along with cruel jokes about how low the event's security had fallen. Andrea was still on the ground, wet and trembling, but now not from the cold, but from the mix of pain and fury boiling inside her. She had trusted these people, had opened her home to them, had given them opportunities, but all it took was for her to appear weak, for them all to trample her as if she were nothing. In the midst of the scene, one of the young women inside, named Laura, looked again at the woman in the rain and frowned. Something about her face was familiar. She took a step toward the door, but Claudia stopped her. "What are you doing? Don't even think about helping her." Laura hesitated, but stepped back. The social pressure was stronger than her instinct. It was right then that Andrea, with a voice both broken and firm, uttered a sentence that chilled everyone present. "This isn't over, I assure you." No one paid her any attention. They thought they were just the words of a desperate woman. They had no idea what they had just provoked. If you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment what you think. At that moment, Andrea's assistant sent a message from the second floor. It was short but direct, everything recorded. Activating the plan. Without looking at her phone, she gave a slight nod. The rain kept falling. The expensive dresses were starting to get wet, and the party no longer had the same sparkle. Something in the atmosphere had changed, but they didn't know it yet. The real party was just beginning. When Andrea got up from the ground on her own, without anyone's help, a barely perceptible smile formed on her face. It wasn't one of happiness, it was a warning, and as she walked away slowly in the rain, the mansion's exterior lights began to go out, one by one, as if the place recognized its true owner and refused to shine for the imposters. No one understood it in that moment. That same night, as Andrea disappeared into the rain, many thought it was the end of the scandal, but they didn't know that while they were drunk on arrogance, the venue's security system had already begun sending recordings to all the email addresses associated with the network of employees and partners. Andrea's personal assistant, Manuel, had clear instructions: expose the truth at dawn. However, before that could happen, Claudia and several guests began to spread the video on social media, mocking what they called the crazy maid. The video went viral quickly, but not with the outcome they expected. Some users started to notice something. The event was being held at the Montalvo mansion, property of a well-known, though low-profile, businesswoman. The coincidences were starting to make more than a few people uneasy. The next day, things took an unexpected turn. Claudia woke up to over 100 missed calls. Checking her messages, she discovered screenshots and posts that named her as the classist planner who humiliated her own boss. Although there was still no official confirmation that the woman was Andrea, the pressure was so intense she had to deactivate her accounts. The event planning office began to receive mass contract cancellations. One of her main sponsors withdrew its investment, citing public misconduct and a lack of professional ethics. Meanwhile, the guests who had mocked her that night also received uncomfortable messages from colleagues and family. Some were already being fired from their jobs for damaging the image of the companies they represented. Andrea hadn't said a word yet. She remained silent, watching. Her assistant approached and asked if she wanted to make a public statement. She shook her head. "Not yet. I want them to feel the weight of their own actions without me having to say who I am," she replied, her voice calm but firm. That decision bought her time. Time for the very people who judged her to start betraying one another. In private chats, they began to look for someone to blame. "It was Claudia's idea," said one. "I only laughed because I thought it was part of the show," said another. Cowardice spread among them like a virus, but Andrea remained silent, waiting for the right moment. It was 2 days later when things took an unexpected turn. A local media outlet published an article with the headline, "The Woman Kicked Out of Her Own Mansion, Classism at Its Finest." In it, they revealed property documents, old photos, and statements from neighbors confirming that Andrea was the legitimate heir to the property and the current owner of several real estate companies. The news exploded. Social media was filled with support for her. Thousands of outraged people shared messages like, "This is what happens when you judge someone by how they look." Things spiraled out of control for Claudia and her accomplices. They could no longer hide the truth. They could no longer mock her. Meanwhile, Andrea walked through the empty halls of her mansion. She hadn't summoned anyone yet. She just stopped in front of the enormous window from which you could see the main garden. The very same garden where many of those who had humiliated her had posed for photos, not knowing they were in the house of the woman they had dragged out into the rain. It was there that she made a phone call to her legal team. "I want a complete list of the contracts signed by every single person present that night today," she said without raising her voice. And it was there, with the soft sound of rain hitting the glass, that she made the decision that would seal everyone's fate. That same week, Andrea called a formal meeting in the very same mansion. She sent invitations to every person who had been at the party, including Claudia. The email read, "Urgent meeting with the owner of the venue. Attendance mandatory to avoid legal consequences." Many came out of fear, others out of shame, and a few, the minority, in an attempt at redemption. When everyone was seated in the main hall, Andrea appeared at the door, impeccable, elegant, and with the same firm gaze she had that night in the rain. The room fell silent. No one dared to say a single word. It was she who broke the ice. "I'm glad to see that this time you do recognize the owner of the place." Claudia was the first to stand up and apologize. "Andrea, I didn't know. I thought you were an intruder." It was all a misunderstanding. But Andrea interrupted her. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was arrogance. It was contempt. It was ego. Then, one by one, the others tried to justify themselves, but she listened to them without showing any emotion. When they finished, she took a document from the table and read it aloud. "All contracts with those present here are terminated, effective immediately. None of my companies will ever again be associated with people incapable of showing humanity." The room was stunned into silence. Claudia collapsed into her seat. Several people left without a word. A month later, the story became a lecture that Andrea gave at a prestigious university. There, she shared her experience and said a sentence that was engraved in the minds of everyone present. "They dragged me out into the rain because they didn't know who I was, and that only confirmed that the respect they gave wasn't genuine. It was pure self-interest." The room erupted in applause. From then on, Andrea became a symbol of dignity and strength, not for the wealth she possessed, but for how she used it to expose what truly matters. A person's worth isn't in their appearance, but in their character. You never know who is behind the mask. Appearances can be deceiving, but respect and dignity must always be non-negotiable.